Hey Sherry, ask me my favorite movie in high school.
Hey Adam, what was your favorite movie in high school?
The Blues Brothers. You want to know why?
I do want to know why.
Because they were on a mission from God.
That is true.
Maybe they're the Jesuits. Actually, one of the reasons why I like the movie is because they wrecked, I think, a record number of police cars, and
Mhm.
they were all being flipped upside down. Maybe we should do a whole podcast on the Blues Brothers and everything that is both right and wrong about it.
All right. Well, it's going to kind of be a one-sided podcast. I'm happy to listen to it because I've only seen the movie once.
Oh, well, maybe we'll have to have a team meeting. All right. Well, let's hear about it.
Okay.
This is the real story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where two broker associates with 35 years of experience talk about all things real estate. All right,
Yes.
Sherry, let's get after it.
Okay, here we are.
All right.
June.
The
It's the
the
first really hot day of the year.
Yeah, yes. I was over at a house working on prepping it, and I realized like after I was there a half hour, I should have turned the air conditioning on. It,
Yes, that's what it's for.
Yeah. Well, when the house is vacant and you're just there to do a little tinkering, it's like it seems silly to waste electricity, but it was quite warm.
Well, and that was yesterday, and it wasn't even as hot as it is today. So,
Yeah. Well, the middle of June, the market continues to be a little bit wonky here in central Contra Costa County. We bumped into a colleague of ours, Patty, yesterday, and he described it as it's a property by property market.
that was absolutely the right thing to say. He was,
Y-
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, it was really interesting to chat with him. Kind of he's actually listing a house in my neighborhood that finally went pending, and we were talking a little bit about the dynamics of it. And I think that houses that are well prepared are still attracting multiple buyers,
Hmm.
and anything short of that, it's kind of all over the board. And things can sit on the market for a little while. Um, I don't want to spend too much time necessarily talking about the market because we got another topic for today. But in most markets across the country, 30 days is nothing to have a property on the market. In fact, 45 to 90 days is still considered a neutral market, and not until you get into, 3 to 6 months does it really start to turn more towards a buyer's market.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that we're noticing, and you probably those of you who've been listening, will point out again, things with HOAs, so condos and townhouses and places like Rossmore, are the ones that are showing the first, I'll say stress, but the first kind of softening or just a little bit more
Hmm.
challenging for sellers at that those price points, kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's
Yes.
letting us know that things are shifting.
Yes.
Um,
Although, having said that, we put two into contract yesterday and they both have HOAs.
that's true, but
So,
but one
but
of them
one
had
of them
been on
had
the
sat on
market
the
a little
market
bit,
for,
little while, so
yeah, one of them had been on the market for 4 months, and the
yeah,
other one had already been in contract and fallen out. So,
yeah.
but fingers crossed that those both close, that they hold together, as we say.
Yep. 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 Um, which kind of brings us to today's topic because
Yeah.
both those properties potentially could be candidates for a flipper.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Do you want to describe what we mean when we say flipper?
Yes. I will start by doing that. I think that I'm going to interview you, though, I have a whole bunch of questions for you about flips because you just did one. So,
Yes.
a definition of a flipper. A flipper is someone who buys a property with the pure intention of improving it and not holding on to it long term. They're going to fix it up, they're going to put it back on the market and sell it and hopefully make money on it.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, anything you want to add to that definition?
Well, I think we're going to cover it as we go along. So
Okay, all right.
keep my powder dry for the moment.
Well, and this all, as you were talking about what's going on with the market and how it's a property by property, as our friend Patty said, one of the things we've seen over the last couple of actually years, is that the houses that are fixed up are selling quickly. The ones that are just cosmetic might be sold to someone who's willing to do some paint and carpet. And the ones that need everything are just sitting there. And those are the kind of houses that flippers go after. However, they don't want to pay full freight for
No,
those
no.
houses. They do not want to pay fair market value. They want to pay, I don't know, let's say wholesale price
Yeah.
to it. And I'm unclear exactly what each one considers wholesale price, but how do flippers find a house as a rule? Let's start there.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm going to mention one of the homes that we just got into contract the last couple of days because
Hmm.
last week we did receive an offer from a flipper, an investor,
Hmm.
and they offered 100K less than our list price. And in this case, it was a significant percentage of its value. And because for the flipper, it's purely a business decision, right? So they're trying to figure out how much money they can make off of something. And we're going to talk about all the different things they might take into consideration. But one of the ways that they go about trying to identify properties is there's a couple ways. One, they spam real estate agents. Sherry,
Yes,
how many
they do.
texts do you think you get a week from investors looking for a property for a fixer that somebody wants to try and buy?
15 to 20.
Yeah. And that's going out to every agent
Yep.
in our area, and they're
Yep.
just trying to see is there anything in somebody's pipeline that the seller or the agent don't want to put on the full market, and so they're trying to grab it so they don't have to compete with anybody else.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Which goes against everything that we as agents believe in and what we say to our clients during a listing appointment, which is you will always make the most amount of money when you put the house on the MLS and expose it to all buyers.
yeah. So we had a house like that a couple years ago, over in Concord. It had
Mhm.
been in one family's possession for like 60 years,
Yep.
lots and lots of deferred maintenance. And
Oh, yeah.
we put it on the open market, at a flipper price and
Mhm.
got 56 offers, and it went significantly over the list price. So even though
Yes.
an investor bought it, they bought it on the open market, which meant that they paid a more competitive price for it.
Hmm.
But there are
Still
some,
got a heck of a buy on it for a 4 bedroom, 2.5 bath house on a quarter of an acre. I
yeah.
mean, I don't think did it go into the sixes? I can't even
I'm
remember.
trying to remember. All I know is we had to call 55 agents and thank them because there was a lot of owner-occupied buyers in that
Yeah.
pool that were just trying to get into some house and that they were willing to do the work themselves. So that's a whole nother podcast.
Well,
Uh,
and I think the agent told us that this guy was going to be an owner occupant, although I drove by that house the other day and it's still just sitting there. I mean, the yard is overgrown. Nobody has touched it.
yeah,
Not sure if they're having trouble getting permits to do it or if they're not sure what they want to do it. But yeah, that was an interesting. I've never had a house that got 56 offers.
yeah,
It was a feeding frenzy. Remember the neighbors called and complained about the traffic problems because it was a little tiny cul-de-sac,
yeah,
maybe four homes. And if you can only imagine how many showings there had to be to solicit 56 offers, there were probably just twice as many who didn't offer.
yeah.
And neighbors were not happy.
Well, understandably so, because I think at one day the trash can didn't get picked up because the cars were blocking the neighbor's trash
Yes.
can from getting
Yeah.
picked up. So they had a legitimate reason to be frustrated.
Totally, totally legitimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one way the flippers find properties then is by spamming every agent, and we pretty much hate that, but that's goes with the goes with the territory.
Yep.
Other ways that flippers they will scour the MLS and look for properties that are just sitting
Yep.
and try and see if people are ready to make a deal because it's been on the market for 30 days, 45
Hmm.
days, 100 days.
Yep.
Sometimes flippers are proactive, and they will write an all cash offer the day something hits the market and for like 100K less than the list price, hoping that somebody will just say, "Oh, isn't this amazing? All cash. Yes, please take the house off my hands." And I imagine there's some circumstances where that might make sense, but not typically to receive a below ask offer on day one.
The first time that happened to me, I got it. We had just put a house on the market, and a couple hours later, I get an email, and it says the subject line is offer for such and such property. And I'm thinking, somebody wrote an offer already. I don't even think we've had any showings yet. And I opened it up, and it was from they, we're calling them flippers. I think they prefer to be called investors, and the houses are flips, but
Yep.
it was from an investor who said attached is an offer for your property at such and such address, and it was for about 75% of what we had listed it for.
Yep.
And I was confused at the time, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is somebody who just hired somebody who knows how to write up offers, and they're sitting at a desk every morning, and they go through all the new listings that have just come on the market, and they write an offer every single one of them, and it's a numbers game, and they're hoping that somebody somewhere says, "Oh yeah, I'll take this." We've
Yeah.
never done that. That's
Yeah.
not how we work, but yeah, that's an interesting strategy.
Yeah. 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 That's everybody's trying to work an angle.
Yeah.
So, all right. So they find a property, a willing
Mhm.
seller to sell
Yep.
it below market value.
Yep.
Because for these investors, it's all about making the dollars and cents, and they all have a target that they anticipate getting as a profit off of
Mhm.
it. And they might make money off of the actual remodeling themselves, depending on whether they have their own crew
Mhm.
or they're hiring it out to other
Yeah.
contractors. So they might say, yeah, I'd like to turn this property around in 3 months, maybe 6 months, and I
Mhm.
like to get 100K profit off of it.
Mhm.
So the lots of things go into the calculation of how they figure it out. They got to talk about the cost of funds. Are they paying cash for the property or getting a hard money loan, which tends to have a higher rate,
Yep.
and might have a penalty for keeping the loan out for more than 6 months
Mhm.
because that hard money lender will want to reinvest it into something else. They don't want it tied up.
Yep.
And so if they're using all cash, they have to consider, opportunity costs. If I put that money in a savings account and got, 4% interest on it, what would I get? Well, you definitely got
Mhm.
to beat that. You maybe even need to beat the stock market, or not
Mhm.
definitely, not maybe, definitely need to beat the stock market. It's got to be worth your risk because it's a little bit riskier. Um, so they will calculate the cost of funds, the purchase price, and then here's the big wild card where people make or lose their money is how much money do they have to invest into getting it up to market condition, and then what will it resell for?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it may be that they buy it for 500, put 300 into it and sell it for 1 million, and they make 200,000 in profit of it. That would be a fantastic scenario. Everybody would love to do that.
Yep.
But it tends to not be that simple
No.
because every house is a little bit different, and they got to get a good idea about what needs to be done.
So
So,
this whole conversation, or as a or topic as a podcast, came to light when one of our clients reached out last week and said that he was thinking about for fun doing a flip, and had started kind of looking at houses to see if there was something out there that might be a good fit. And of course, he would have to talk his wife into letting him do something like that. This is a guy with a full-time job who thinks that maybe this would be a fun thing to do and a lucrative thing to do.
yeah.
So what kind we don't normally see, well, you know what, I was going to say, we don't normally see people who, have a 9 to 5 doing flips, but maybe we do. What do you think a flipper what looks like? Is it someone who does this for a living? Is
So
it somebody
it's
who,
somebody who likes adventure and is a risk taker. It's just a
Mhm.
personality. It's got to be somebody who likes the idea of having a chance to make some money and willing to take a risk on it,
Mhm.
and the adventure of going beyond maybe what they know. So
Yeah.
oftentimes we see contractors doing this because
Mhm.
it's less risky for a contractor in theory because they know better what it's going to take to improve the property because they do that
Hmm.
for a living,
Hmm.
and they're probably going to do it themselves. So they're not paying somebody else's markup. They're just
Yeah.
paying for their own crew's labor and
Yeah.
obviously material, but they're not paying somebody else's profit.
Yeah.
Their profit is all tied into the flipping of the property, and they don't have to double pay, so to speak.
Okay.
Um, the I think that it's, some, even if you're not doing it as a contractor, you need to have some knowledge and some experience because there's a lot of things that go into doing it right, and right is very subjective.
Hmm.
But when I say right, getting in this case, I mean it purely from a profit standpoint. So
Hmm.
what are the types of things that the current market is calling for? What are the things that are going to, you can do an inexpensive upgrade that will have a big turnaround. Knowing those things is really important because, shoot, you could drop a lot of money into every house and get top dollar for it, but you're trying to spend as little as money as possible
Yeah.
to get the most bang out of it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
it, it.
and it varies by price point. So like for instance, I know you referenced me as a flipper, which is
Mhm.
not exactly right, but my brother and I inherited our longtime family home, and it really had not been updated in like 50 years.
Mhm.
And it was in a market where, even though my parents paid 24,000 for it in
Wow.
1968, it was probably a $2 million property in
Yep.
the right condition.
Yep.
In its condition as the way that we inherited it, after it being a rental for 40 years, it was probably only worth about 1.4, or 1.5s. And so we went in and put in dual pane windows and upgraded all the electrical and the plumbing and added another bathroom and painted interior, exterior. We finished all the hardwood floors and put in new
Redid the
hardware.
kitchen, redid the bathrooms.
Yes, put in a new driveway and patio.
It
And
was it was stunning.
yeah,
It didn't hurt that it was in a prime location in
right,
Oakland.
right. It had a lot of up potential. And so it was
Mhm.
easy to spend several $100,000 knowing that it was going to make, that and more. And it was going to take my brother and I about a year to do that. So
Yeah.
it was a good investment for us. The farther down you go in the price point, the harder it is to make that kind of profit. Because, for
Mhm.
instance, the painting of a house doesn't cost any different for a $2 million house than for a $1 million house, the same
Mhm.
size. It takes the same crew, the same amount of time, the same amount
Right.
of paint, everything else.
Right.
So you've got to pick and choose your projects a little bit better. So if you're buying at a lower price point, there's got to be less things that need to be done, um, and being able to do more of the polish. And I
Mhm.
think that there is a kind of an ethical conversation to be had in the midst of this about the things that you do, that aren't hiding problems just to put
Mhm.
polish on it. But that's
Mhm.
that's kind of a separate podcast to talk about kind of the ethics of it. So we're just trying to talk about dollars and cents at the moment. Um,
Although it might come up in some, yeah, we might discuss it in a few minutes when we talk about a flip that we showed a couple of weeks ago. But
the-
I kind of think that you were an ideal flipper because you have something most flippers don't have, and that is an eye to the market and what buyers are looking for.
yeah,
A lot of buyers are, if they're a contractor, if they're somebody who just decided this seemed like a fun thing, they've never been out showing houses to buyer after buyer after buyer after for year after year after year like we have. And we know when a house can be sold, when a house that has been flipped can be sold, and whether or not they did a good job. This is not just go buy a bunch of stuff from Home Depot and put it in the house and put it on the market. You've got to know what a buyer is looking for.
yeah.
And that's what made your experience such a good one because you do know that.
Well, it's really interesting because it's not often you get a A/B example, but the
Hmm.
neighbor at that property, put their house on the market not long after I did, and
Yeah.
they have really been struggling to find their footing in this market. They did some upgrades and some improvements, and it just hasn't been the same. And it's not exactly fair because the houses aren't identical and there's some differences to it, but
Yeah.
it there is a, there's you gotta you got to, like you said, you got to know what the market is asking for
Yep.
from the house and then
Yep.
aim for that.
Oh yeah.
I think the other advantage that we had on that project was something that is just so old and decrepit. It has such a low value in its current state. It's not hard to improve on it. And such so for instance, if you look at a house where, say, the floors are just a disaster, just stains everywhere, whatever else, the cost of improving that to a floor that just looks a little bit tired but isn't bad, you could
Hmm.
live with it. It's got a few scuffs on it.
Hmm.
Well, it costs the same to refinish that floor, but it's the delta in its value from being completely destroyed or just having a few scratches is, the cost of improving it is the same, even though the improvement is a much bigger difference.
Yeah.
Um, and we had that happen on a listing recently where it was you could move into it. It was clean enough that you could move into it. The carpet was clean, but it was still kind of dated. It had
Hmm.
tile countertops and it had old cultured stone counters in the bathrooms.
Hmm.
And so the flipper who offered 100K less on it, because they had to redo those bathrooms, even though they were serviceable, to
Yeah.
bring it up to, but they didn't want to pay. Um, they didn't want to pay what somebody who was moving into it might want to pay for it. And so that
Right.
delta was the difference between that flipper not getting it and an
Right.
owner occupied person getting it because they were going to live with it.
Yeah, the conversation with the agent was kind of chilling because they didn't have any emotion attached to it. And because you and I work with a lot of owner occupants, there's a lot of emotion involved in when you're looking for a house. And this agent, she knew her investor pretty well. It was a completely I mean, it was all about the money, how
Yeah.
much they were willing to spend, knowing how much work they needed to put into it. And her salesmanship maybe was a little wanting because the way she was trying to convince me to take this offer that was 100,000 less than the list price was to tell me all the bad things about the house. And she made it seem like it was completely unlivable,
Yeah.
when in fact, someone had been living there very happily for decades.
Yes.
And there was nothing wrong with that house. And she said, well, it doesn't matter to my client what condition it's in because he needs to do everything, whether or not it's habitable or not. And it's like that's how an investor or a flipper
Yeah.
thinks,
Yeah.
They don't care if
Exactly.
it's inhabitable for what they need it for. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. As it turned out, we turned down the offer. Our client turned down the offer. We did a price reduction, which the other agent took credit for, which was not accurate, and we put it into contract for almost that full price that we'd reduced it
Yeah.
to within days after it happened. So she knew her client. We knew our market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I mean, they'll move on to something else. And the people who bought this house are going to move in and live in it. So,
Yeah. And they're gonna love it.
yep, absolutely. Um, so the flip that you did of your family home was very successful. It took a lot of time. You had a full-time job in addition to managing a lot of crews and the city of Oakland and permits and all kinds of things. um, a neighbor who was complaining about, noise and dust and the time that the contractor, drove over her plant.
Well, it
About
was upsetting. I'm
it
absolutely.
was, yes, it
Yeah.
was a lot to deal with, but in the end, you knew what you were doing because you do this for a living.
Yeah.
Were you, swinging a hammer yourself, and installing light fixtures, which I'm sure you know how to do, but you weren't doing it on this house.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you mentioned was it's the same amount of money or same amount of work to hire a painter, whether it's a flip or whether it's I can't remember the exact words you used.
Well, it doesn't
It's
matter
like,
if it's a really bad house or a
yes, or a
slightly
good
tired
house.
house, right? Like the cost of paint is the same.
But you knew that because this house was in Rockridge, that you needed a better painter than if the house was over on International Boulevard, where you
Yes.
are a completely different painter
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
it. So
But I
there's
think
a
that
lot to know.
But I think that's where flippers make mistakes is that they will hire sometimes the least expensive uh, um, contractors to do the work, and it
Yep.
really ruins it. So we can go back to
Yep.
a house that we had a client write an offer on that was flipped, and
Ugh. Yeah.
they have ruined the house. I
Yeah.
don't even know other way to say it, but they
I don't know. It's a bit salvageable at this point.
yeah, they've had it listed at, I think as high as 1.4, and then
Mhm.
they dropped it a couple times, and then they really dropped it hoping to get a bid a high overbid. So they dropped it to like 850 or 825 or something. But there was painting holidays all over, as my dad would say, holidays everywhere where they didn't mask things off properly. It's like you're trying to sell it for 1.4, you've got to have the quality of workmanship
Absolutely.
and some of it's design. You've got to pick designs that are contemporary. We talked a little bit about that moments ago, but you also then have to have the quality of workmanship. So if you're trying to flip a $650,000 house, you might use some less expensive vendors in that circumstance. But if
Yeah.
you're trying to get 1.4 million, in theory, you need to pay to have the quality for a $1.4 million house. And it's not
Absolutely.
just about zip code. It's about the quality of the house in that zip code.
Buyers are very savvy. They see things that they don't always see all the things that we see, but they see a lot of them, especially in this house where they were so obvious. You could see the seams in the sheetrock where they hadn't been taped properly and then they hadn't textured properly on top of that. There were uneven floors that had been they
Un,
had
un,
tried to.
Uneven, there's two parts about that. So you talk about the slope of the floor, but then talk
Yep.
about what the real problem was.
Tell the story.
Okay,
Tell,
so
tell the
in
story.
in this house before the flip, there is a wall that went around the kitchen. It was kind of a galley kitchen, so a
Yep.
wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. And in the original design, there was a step up into the kitchen of about 2 inches.
Yep.
Now, when the walls are there and you walk through a doorway, you visually kind of feel that's what's happening, and you step up into that space.
Yeah.
Well, they did something good by taking that wall down to create this big open grand room, which not everybody, but is a design style that a lot of people like.
Yep. Open concept.
But they didn't level the floor out so that it was all at the same level. So there was this 2 inch step up, not just through a doorway, but all the way around this kitchen, which is now instead of one big flat floor. The bathrooms also had a step up, but they were a little less intrusive because you went through a doorway into a new space. So it
Yeah.
wasn't, while it was awkward, it wasn't as bad as the kitchen.
I thought it was funkier than you did. You thought it was
Yeah.
maybe acceptable.
Well, it more acceptable than the
The
kitchen.
kitchen, yeah.
And
So
so
what they do to the kitchen to even out those floors?
So they use what looked like peel and stick shelving paper quality linoleum and
Uh-huh.
beveled it
Uh,
so that it sloped up.
yep.
Didn't match the rest of the floor. I mean, it was
No,
similar in color, but it wasn't the same
it,
flooring. I
it, it
have
was all
never seen
brown,
it.
but it was a totally different pattern.
And so, like the clients that we had looking, I was like, well, we're gonna have to take all that out, jackhammer that part of the slab out, re-pour it so that it's all level. And so we wrote an offer commensurate with needing to do all that work. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh no, we're gonna counter at 1.3. Good luck with that.
But the workmanship was not 1.3 worthy. So that
Yeah.
was, I've seen a lot of bad houses in my career. I went through the recession when there were houses that had been trashed by angry homeowners who were losing their homes. And I mean, they were sold as is. There was no money to fix them up when they were a short sale or a foreclosure. But this has to be one of the worst houses I've seen that has been done by a quote unquote investor. So they just had no clue what they were doing, who to hire, whether the workmanship was commensurate with what they were expecting. And I think they're going to lose their shirts on it.
The the agent is from the South Bay, and so you hear about all these really outrageous stories about, one bedroom, one bath house
Yeah,
that goes for 2 million, right? And
yeah.
ridiculous like that.
And
And
then they level it.
yeah, and I just wonder whether these investors thought that they could do anything they want with this house and that
Yeah.
somebody would overpay for it, just like they do
Yeah.
in the South Bay.
Yeah.
And this is not the market for that. And
No.
in fact, maybe we should talk about that.
That's right on my list of questions is this the right market for flippers?
Yeah. So I think it depends on your horizon and what the property is, because there's just a lot of different factors. But the current market that is transitional, taking more days to sell,
Mhm.
and buyers being picky,
Mhm.
it's a the risk of the flipper investor property is greater than it would be in the booming market that we had just a couple years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So is it possible to get something that needs to be polished and doesn't need any structural work, but just needs to be made look pretty, and you can buy it for a good price, do the work, and make it look amazing, and then put it back
Mhm.
in the market? Absolutely.
Mhm.
But they're going to be harder to find, I think. And it just depends on what you're financing. Well, that's the other thing is right now is financing is more expensive.
Yeah.
And so when money was cheap a few years ago, it was easier. But now you're going to have greater outlays. Uh, and I think that, your choice of projects is going to be more sensitive. I would not buy a condo or a townhouse right now to flip because those are really challenging. In fact, I was talking with a
Yeah.
colleague who has an investor property that was flipped, and they're having a hard time getting somebody to come make an offer on it, even though it was really well done. Um, so I would say that it's possible. There are projects out there to be had, but it's riskier. And
Mhm.
you need to be doing the right thing to the right property and for the right amount of money because it's going to cost you, to buy and sell. It's going to cost you, just for the transaction part of it, anywhere from 3 to 5%
Yeah.
of its value, which means you've got to make profit above 5%, um, to
Yeah.
make a difference. So
Yeah. The house that we showed that we're just talking about had a loan on it. Sometimes I think investors or flippers pay cash. And you mentioned a term before that some people may not have heard of, hard money. What is hard money?
it's hard to come by. Um, so normally when you buy a property, you secure the
Mhm.
loan. You use the house to secure the loan. And so that way the investor says, all right, I loaned you $1 million. And if you stop paying me, I'm going to take the property and sell
Yeah.
it to make my money back.
Yeah. Yeah.
A hard money loan is more like a personal loan. And it
Yeah.
says, Mr. Investor, I'm going to loan you $1 million, but if the property doesn't sell for the price, I'm coming after it from you.
I'm going to loan you $1 million and I'm going to secure a lien on the property to protect my money that I'm going to loan you.
But
It's just not a handshake.
it's not a handshake, but it also is a personal loan in the
It
sense
is a
of
personal loan. It's not a
that,
traditional lender. This
right.
is not Fannie or Freddie or any one of those government sponsored entities. Uh,
Meaning that if that house sells as a short sale, they can still come collect against you as an
correct.
individual and go after your other assets.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
why it's yeah. You think about the loan shark or the underworld boss in the VIG. That's what these are closer to that. They're not regulated. It's legal. They're not mobsters loaning the money, but it's more dangerous than it looks.
So can I tell you I've had a couple hard money loans and they went or hard money transactions and they were fine, but I had one interesting situation which can I share it with you? It's
Of
kind of
course.
crazy. Um, I had clients who were about to lose their house. They had some unfortunate circumstances happen in their family, and they really needed to sell their house or they were going to lose their house. And the close of escrow was coming up, and they did not have the money to go out and pay first and last rent to rent a house. And I was fairly new in the business, and my broker at the time said, "You should have them call Sasha." And I'm like, who's Sasha? And he said, he's a hard money lender. And he kind of sat me down, gave me Sasha's phone number and explained how it would work. And I gave the number to, I can't remember if I called Sasha or if my clients called Sasha, but Sasha was willing to give them 10 grand. And he had the title company write up a deed, and the client signed it, got it notarized. It was notarized. It was all recorded and legitimate. And Sasha said, "Why don't you come down and pick up the check?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." He lived in Blackhawk. Heavy, yeah. Anyway, I
Nice
I
catch.
drove. Huh? What?
Yeah, nice self-editing there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to say about Sasha, but when he came to the door, let's say that Sasha didn't feel the need to wear all of his clothes that day, um, and he invited me. He was I believe he also had a joint in his hand that he was enjoying, and he invited me in, and I was like, nope, nope, I'm all good. I'll just take the check and thank you so much. And I went back and told my broker who'd referred me to Sasha the story. He's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about that part of it." But that was my first experience with hard money lenders.
Okay,
And
so I feel the need that we need to clarify this, that there are very legitimate hard money lenders out there
yeah,
that are reputable
and wear all
investment
their
and
clothes.
financial that are that wear suits and ties and are not like that at all. But yeah,
Yes. Well, yes, I have to tell the funny stories along with the, yeah, there are legitimate
absolutely,
hard money
absolutely. We just don't
lenders
want to
out
scare
there.
people off from hard money loans because they can make a big deal, especially for people that are um buying before they sell. That
Yes.
there are some products from traditional lenders,
Yes.
but sometimes they're not. And so, uh,
Yeah, I mean, I had a transaction over on Risdon, I think, where it was multiple offers and somebody wanted to separate themselves from the pack, and they went and got a hard money loan so that because essentially it's all cash.
right.
And they could, make an offer and say, I'll close in 5 days because I've got all cash, when really what they had was hard money. And we closed escrow, and then they financed a traditional mortgage after closing, paid off the hard money lender, and then had beat out all the rest of the
Yeah.
competition. So yeah, it's yeah, interesting to say the least. You can edit that out if you want to.
No, no, I'm leaving it in. It's a good story. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't scaring everybody off.
All right. So that's what a hard money loan is. Let's see. Um, so a couple years ago, there was a change to our disclosures, specifically the seller property questionnaire, and they added what has been called the flipper clause.
Yep.
Why did they do that, and what does it look like?
So um, there's a lot of gray area about who can do what sort of work on a property
Yeah.
and whether or not you need a licensed contractor and a general contractor and what
Hmm.
work needs to be done by a contractor.
Hmm.
And so, because as a homeowner, you might be allowed to do something that is technically a licensed work, but if you're going to resell, you're supposed to do it with a licensed work because part of why you're getting permits, for instance, is that I know the cynical person has said it's just revenue generating for municipalities and counties and whoever else, but
Hmm.
the logic behind it is that you're buying something that's been done prepared safely. The wiring has been done correctly. You're not going to start a fire. The plumbing has been done in a way that's not going to cause a leak. And so that's traditionally why you get permits. So
Yeah.
when flippers are doing things, they are being a little loose and fancy free with
Hmm.
whether they need to get permits for everything, partly because of time frame, depending on what they're doing.
Also,
Uh,
time is money.
yeah, right. If it takes 6 months to get approval to put a bathroom in, that's a 6 months of VIG
Yeah.
interest on that hard money loan.
Yeah.
That's you're not getting done. But you don't necessarily need a permit to paint or to put in flooring or to do faucets or light fixtures. So sometimes homeowners or not homeowners, flippers will just do it themselves, even if they don't have a contractor's license. And so the SPQ change in this SPQ is to require flippers who have bought just for the purpose of improving and reselling to disclose all of the vendors that they've used,
Yep.
whether they're licensed or not, so
Yep.
that Mr. and Mrs. Buyer can say, oh, look, he used his cousin to do this, and his cousin doesn't have a license. Or
His cousin Sasha.
yeah, or he did use his uncle who does have a real estate or not a real estate, a
Right.
contractor's license, and so even if they didn't get a permit, they can maybe get a little bit more comfortability that it was done properly by somebody who
Yeah.
knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's designed to for the be more transparent because quite frankly, especially at lower price points, flippers are notoriously don't do things well. They're just trying to make it look good and not do it right.
Yep.
And we could talk about that here for a little bit too, but that's in for the SPQ. That clause was designed to make flippers be more transparent about the quality of the workmanship.
And accountable
Yep.
because traditionally, someone who has never lived in a house has different disclosure duties than someone who has.
Mhm.
And I think some flippers use that as a way to get around doing disclosures. And so
Right.
the flipper clause helped them be held accountable to potential buyers.
Right. Right.
So we consider that a good thing.
Absolutely. Uh,
Um, so
let's pivot into the perils of buying a house that's been flipped.
okay, that's a great
Um,
count.
because it's all over the board.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes we had a client a few years ago buy a new construction, so not a flip, brand new
Mhm.
construction. And even though it passed the city permits, for this luxury condo, she hired a home inspector. She just
Yes,
wanted
she
to make
did.
sure that just because the county or the city signed off on it, that it was actually done well and that she
Yeah.
wasn't going to anticipate any problems. And in other parts of the country or in communities, not necessarily country, it could be in California,
Mhm.
where there is new construction, there are inspectors that specialize in new construction
Yeah.
inspections, and there's
Yeah.
some warranty. And so there's oftentimes an 11-month inspection. So after they've owned it 11 months, they will do a new construction inspection to look for all the warranty things that maybe didn't get done right the first
Yeah.
time so they could be corrected.
And
But
I
there isn't
believe that
really
a lot
something
of,
like that for flippers.
right, right. When we say this was a condo, this was a multi-million-dollar condo and it was absolutely stunning. But she still was a responsible buyer and said, I want to make sure that someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the property takes a look at it and tells me exactly what they did. And as it turned out, it came through with flying colors.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it was
So,
very well done. Yeah, that
yeah,
that turned
yeah.
out not to be an issue.
So
Um,
what kind of house would you, if you were a flipper, what would you not, or no, let's say if you were a buyer, what kind of flip would you not think about?
well, I mean, I think that the so, for example, maybe the previous transaction, it was bought 6 months to a year ago, had dry rot in the
Mhm.
kitchen or in the bathroom.
Mhm.
And the flippers put a new floor down, but has not done any of the dry rot
Yeah.
work or
Yeah.
hasn't shown that they took care of it. It hasn't had
Yep.
a reinspection.
Yep.
That's a classic example of they may have, well, I'm not accusing anybody because this is hypothetical, but they may have just covered up the damage and made
Yep.
the bathroom look pretty, but not taking
Yep.
care of some structural defect.
Yep. Big red flag.
Yeah. And that could be true just even with sometimes we'll see that the roof was older and there were clearly dry rot on eaves and barge rafters, and they've
Mhm.
just painted it and left this older roof on. It's
Yeah.
like there's
Yeah.
more work that needed to be done there. And
Yeah.
while it might look pretty, there still is the underlying structural, I'll say structural, I don't necessarily mean like foundation structural, but
Mhm.
some bigger issues that have been ignored while they
Mhm.
made it look pretty, because you're going to have to disrupt all of that pretty part to fix the thing that they ignored.
Yep.
Those are the kinds of things when you're looking at a property that an investor flipped property. How far down did they go to bring it up to current standards?
Yeah. Do flippers do inspections to see what's wrong with a house before they start to work on it? Would they know if
Not
it's a foundation problem
No, I mean they should from their own experience know that, but I'm not sure
if
that
they're
they,
experienced?
yeah, not necessarily do depends on what they know they're going to touch, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, you know, bathroom remodels and kitchen remodels, oftentimes just in the process of taking it back to the studs, you see what's wrong and you fix what you find.
yeah,
Um, and so you don't necessarily need to do inspections because you're exposing what needs to be exposed
yeah.
in order to do that. I mean, I think the things that flippers miss often are those things that are underneath the floor. Have
Hmm.
they taken care of the dry rot? Did they
Hmm.
replace the plumbing below the floor? Was there damage to the plumbing below the floor? And did they take
Hmm.
care of it at the same time? You may remember we interviewed James from Wallace Termite, I don't know, last
Hmm.
fall.
Yeah,
And the first time I met James a long time ago, he wasn't my regular termite inspector until we became partners, but he was on the other side of a transaction. He did an inspection for the seller and they found dry rot in this, and this wasn't a flip, but the seller kept hiring his handyman to do the work and then inviting James back out to sign off on it. It's like
yeah,
you haven't you've ignored the board that has the dry rot on it. And
yeah,
then the person came and did a little bit more work and James came back out again like the board that has a dry rot on it is still there. And it was just like unclear of the concept. And so it, just depends on the flippers. I think that the flips that are done by contractors actually tend to be better than the flips that have been done like this potential client that we have who's going to do it for the first time. He doesn't know what he's doing.
yeah.
He actually is kind of trade adjacent in his so I actually think that he does some other stuff for us. So I know that he would do the details, but he's the
Hmm.
prime example of somebody like, well, I'm just going to go in and paint and do floors and put in new faucets in the bathroom and
Yeah.
ignore some bigger things. You got to tend to it all, or enough. I shouldn't say all, because there's always more that you can do.
How does a flipper protect themselves from being sued later?
They do it in an LLC and then they disappear. The LLC
Mm,
disappears.
mm. So not to toot our horns, but you need a really good agent who has some really good inspectors if you're going to consider a flip.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to they're all over the board. There are flips that are well done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I wouldn't even necessarily characterize that most of them are bad. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that, but there are some bad ones out there, and some are obvious, and others are you need to take a better look at it.
It's just that the bad ones are so memorable.
They hurt, yeah.
Yeah, they're painful. They are painful. So,
Yeah.
well, let's see if we've answered all the questions that do you need a contractor's license to flip?
Well, you should, but no.
Yeah. And then let's see, when is a good time to flip a house?
When you can afford to lose your money.
When we were coming out of the recession in about 2012, we thought we were at the bottom of the market, and I had a couple buyers who were waiting because they wanted to buy at the bottom of the market, and I kept saying, "We're pretty much at the bottom. You don't know you're at the bottom until it starts to go up. So the minute it starts to go up, even the slightest bit, you need to buy."
Yeah.
And we're just so afraid to pull the trigger. And all of a sudden, I mean, I went one Sunday after, 5 years of pretty much terrible, terrible, terrible real estate market. I was a little late to an open house. I got there right when I should have had the doors open and ready to go. And there were people standing on the lawn and in the street waiting to get in. And I thought, oh, the market changed. Today
Yeah.
is the day the market changed. And I ended up getting like 8 offers on this house in Gregory Gardens. It had a terrible foundation, like everything most of them over there does. But yeah, that was a good time to start buying houses to flip because we were at the bottom of the market
Yeah.
and it was starting to go up, you know. And it's a honestly, I don't think I would ever be a flipper. If I had money that I didn't know what else to do with, I would buy houses and turn them into rentals.
Yeah, there is that.
Yep.
Well, as long as you mention that, I would say one of the things that I would look for if I was going to flip a property is that it doesn't have any of those major defects,
Yep.
like a foundation or a slab that's been
Yep.
cracked, because it's you don't get paid back for that. You get paid
No.
back for the sexy, for
Yep.
the new doorknobs, the new hinges, the new bathroom
Yep.
fixtures, the new
Yep.
floor. You don't make money off of a new HVAC system or a new foundation,
Yeah.
or a new roof. Well, if
Yeah.
those are serviceable, you can make a lot off the sizzle, but you're not going to make a lot off of doing the structural foundational stuff.
Yeah. Our newsletter this month is going to talk about how not to buy the wrong house.
Yeah, well, that was our last podcast, so
Yes, and we're going to talk. Yes, and we're going to talk about incurable defects, things that you can never change.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So be aware of those. So,
All right. If you are thinking about being an investor and you want to know more about how to improve a home and how to know what to do, you should hire an agent to at least to consult. And
yep,
one of the things that happens with investors, they will make a deal with an agent to help them buy and sell, and so they will often have a discount on that, on one side or the other, especially if you're doing it within 6 months. So if you want to know more about that, please give us a call. We'd be happy to help you, just like we would do with all our clients.
yep, absolutely.
All right. Dorothy was right. There's no place like home. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.